Siege Springer was my first figure from the War for Cybertron trilogy. I got him for Christmas 2019 and I loved it. And can you really blame me? G1 Springer is a design with potential baked into him from the outset. Vibrant colours you don't really see too often in the franchise, and the fun factor of a triple changer with the security of the two modes being incredibly similar. It would be very hard for this design to fall flat in toy form, but there were always some little issues I had with the Siege figure. The colours seemed a little too neon and stuck out from the crowd in a bad way, the accessories were a little unsatisfying with the way they part spawned on copter mode, and the transformation felt a little overly tedious. So when whispers of a Studio Series rendition of the character surfaced, I was intrigued. Then we saw photos and found out it was a partial of the Siege version, which I can get behind. Once again, great figure. But does Studio Series 86 Springer justify the upgrade? Well, from a visual standpoint, I'd say mostly. The sculpted detail and proportions on this figure are fantastic. There are quite a few components that carry over from the Siege release in this mode, but not quite the majority. The shins, the middle portion of the crotch, the forearms, and some of the transformation assembly on the sides of the torso all carry over from the older figure, and everything else is brand new sculpting, and the figure does a great job at blending the more detailed parts from the Siege toy with the smoother surfaces in the 86 styles. The chest and shoulders are the real standouts. Being re-engineered to sit at show accurate angles really gives the figure that thick boy look from the show, and the movie. And speaking of the show, that head is ripped straight out of the animation, good lord. I was a big fan of the way the Siege head looked, but this one just carries so much more personality. 86 doesn't always nail the heads, but I think they did here. There are a few issues I have with the sculpt though. There are some gaps in the collar that are pretty evident thanks to the way the shoulders angle out, which are pretty apparent from some poses. That would be fine if not for the fact the proportions of the torso have been altered from the Siege figure. It's slightly longer so Springer can stand taller, that's fine, but the shoulders are mounted in the same place as before. This causes the shoulders to look pretty strange in some poses. They just seem to drop without the shoulder pads on top filling the space. You can work around it, but it's a notable blemish on the figure, but that's the least of this figure's problems. Now, the colours here absolutely crush it. These shades are dead perfect. I love the slightly muted but still vibrant greens. They're so much easier on the eyes than the highlighter shades of the Siege version. The minty grey, I don't know what else to call it, on the hands and thighs looks excellent and provides some good colour breakup. And the bluish grey is significantly desaturated to match the rest of the figure. All the plastic choices here just work a whole lot better together than on his predecessor. The painted detail is pretty solid too. There are a lot of pops of colour across this figure, including all of the yellow and the majority of the dark green. All the paint is very clean and well applied, but some of the yellow seems a little on the thin side, so I'd approach with caution to avoid paint chipping. Overall, while there are some issues with the look of this guy, I can't say it looks bad by any means. All the changes from the Siege figure besides that change in the height work fantastically, and he fits a lot better with the current Chug figures. He looks superb next to Sandstorm actually. Now, the accessories on this figure, look, I've never been one to complain about accessories because universal compatibility, plenty of figures have spare hands, but this figure has too many accessories. So let's start with the good ones. He comes with this giant green sword. Now I love this because I love oversized weapons, and when you plug this thing into his hand, you know that's exactly what this is. It's huge. But if this kind of weapon isn't quite for you, then you can use this tab to plug it in on any of the 3 slots in the back. You're gonna want to keep it handy. This thing turns into the helicopter blades. And then you can give him this much smaller and much more accurate sword. This too works excellently with the look. There's loads of detail on it, but not too much, and it's a great size for the figure. You can also tab it on the back. Take a shot for every time a weapon tabs on the back, I dare you. There is one major issue with this sword. A lot of the paint has been scratched up, and all that happened within the first hour of unboxing this guy. I noticed it, and I've been very gentle with the sword since. I suggest you do the same. Next, we have this massive rifle. I love this. It's so detailed, and the matte paint just helps all the detail pop so much more. It looks great in Springer's hands, pairs nicely with the silver sword, and you can tab it on the back. Now, if that's where the accessories ended, I'd be happy, but there was more space on the sprues for the figure, so we got some extra stuff. Now, this doesn't mean that the figure was marked up in price because of these accessories. The leader markup was already in place for the retooling, and these accessories were added after the fact to fill the sprues. I believe the designers talked about it in the reveal stream for this figure. If I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments. But because of that, we were given this Wrecker Hammer. It's the unpainted minty grey of the thighs, so you can't really see the detail too clearly, but there is a lot of surface detail on this thing. Chips and scratches, it looks well worn and is going straight into my Emirate Zaron's hands when he arrives. This hammer can also tab on Springer's back. You also get the Devastator missile.
I got better things to do tonight than die.
The thing from that moment, this is pretty nicely detailed. It's got a port on the back for some blast effects and a tab for Springer's back. but he can't hold it without balancing it in his hands. There's just nothing for the figure to grab. And on top of that, it's way too big. This thing is going to take up space in the accessory tub forever. Finally, you get a couple of carryover guns from the Siege figure. They're nicely sculpted and all, but they feel a little too small for the figure now. They can tab together into a longer rifle if that's what you want to do, but just like the missile, these are going in the box. This is Loubat from the future, just remembering that you can open up this wrist panel and flip out this little doohickey if you rotate the arm around, which gives him that little gun that he shot Starscream with. It's a fun little gimmick and it can take blast effects apparently, but I'm not bending one to fit it in there. Also, the wrist doors are way too loose. Anyway, back to it. The accessories here that the figure can properly integrate with are great. I love the swords and the long rifle. The hammer has its charms. They all look really solid in the figure's hands too, but I'm a little unhappy with the execution of the missile. Who knows, maybe it'll integrate with Devastator somehow. I'm recording this a week before it gets revealed. Now, the posing on this figure, would you believe it's actually a little worse than the Siege figures? The head can basically only swivel. There's a ball joint in there, but the way the neck panel is mounted inhibits it. You can fold that panel to get him looking down though. The arms can move out standardly, but you have to shift the shoulder pad as you do it, and the shoulders can't quite go all the way around. He's got bicep swivels, very deep elbows, wrist swivels, opening hand that is the only new moment of articulation on this figure. He has a waist swivel, which is fairly free, but it does have a little bit that stops it at the back. The hips can move out standardly and forward and back really far. There's thigh swivels, extremely deep knees that don't untab like the Siege version. The feet can point down slightly and up a lot, and there's ridiculous ankle pivots. The posing here is very good, but everything this figure does except the hands, the Siege figure did. A lot more solidly. It's complaining time. This figure has a lot of issues with the QC, at least on my copy, and according to some of your comments, a lot of other copies too. So, these little bits of detail that angle out for transformation, these are so stiff that they stress the plastic when you try and bend them, and the backpack panel they sit on, with the accessory tabs I might add, is too loose so it flops down all the time. The hips on mine are slightly too loose, so sometimes when the figure's posed, the legs just slowly creep out until the figure falls over, and if the figure doesn't fall over, because of the hips, the incredibly loose ankles will do it. I've heard stories about people's Siege Springers having loose ankles, but mine was fine, but this figure could not stand up straight without supports until I hit the ankles with some kikis. They aren't perfect now, but at least he can stand straight. These are all major issues with the build of this figure that kind of diminish its fun factor a ton. This thing is a triple changer. I find this kind of figure incredibly important to feel solid because of how much it's trying to do. There's much more of an innate fun factor to triple changes, and this guy squanders that with his build. Color me disappointed. And that's not even going into the worst problem I've had with this guy. I'll cover that later. Transformation to car mode is great. I can't fault it. It's almost exactly the same as the Siege figure, except that awkward torso origami is gone, replaced with a simple series of folding panels and unlocking tabs until you're left with the front of a space car. Finish the back section, which is a little hard to tab in, and you get this sweet thing right here. I'm a big fan of Springer's car mode, and this figure does do a pretty solid job at it. It's not perfect. The animation model was a little more roundy, and a lot of the parallels can be drawn to the Siege version, but overall, I really like the way it looks. The new chest and shoulders make a much smoother looking front to the car in my books, and the intakes on the top are a real nice touch. I've always found this car mode to be a little thin at the back, but I think I can excuse that here now that it feels a little less blocky. You can of course still plug the accessories into the roof, but other than that, there's not much you can do with this car mode except turn it into a helicopter. The copter mode transformation is pretty straightforward and affair. The legs expand and flip out, the forearms also expand and flip out. It's worth noting to make sure that you rotate the thigh swivels and not the hips though. Once you're all done with that, you can open up the green sword and plug it onto the top with a lot of force since the port isn't quite sized right, causing the rotating lime green part to get stuck and tear off when you try and remove the sword. Yeah, this was the catastrophic issue that I had with this figure. I was thankfully able to pry the connector out of the port using a knife and then sanded the hell out of the post, then reattach the pin. It might be a little looser connection now, but at least it won't break again. I'd be very careful with this part of the figure, and if you're feeling some resistance plugging the rotors in, sand them down, it'll save you a lot of hassle. But when you do get the rotor on successfully, the copter mode is pretty great. I love this. All the elements that carry over from the car mode work just as well here. The smoother front end, the intakes on the top, it all looks fantastic. There are a few issues I have with this mode though. These little landing gear support wing things are a little floppy on my copy since they don't tab in at all. That's a little annoying. These gaps in the front are pretty apparent from most angles, and there's no stand port under the chopper. I had to balance this thing on my claw attachment to get these photos. It's not the end of the world, but it's annoying. But for positives outside the look, the propeller blades look really great and spin super freely, and I much prefer the way that they look over the Siege version. There is a carryover from the Siege figure in that those wings can facilitate the smaller guns on the sides if you want a more weaponized chopper, and those wings are not tabbing in aside. This is probably Springer's best feeling mode. Overall, I do like this figure, but strangely, not more than the Siege version. For every one thing that this figure does right, that one also does something a little better outside the look and accessories. My Siege Springer is built much better than my 86 one. They both pose the same, except 86 Springer has one extra point of articulation in the hands and one less for the limited head. The Siege figure's knees don't stay tabbed in, the 86 ones do. The 86 figure has a better transformation, but the Siege one didn't break. In terms of pros and cons, I feel that these figures are pretty evenly matched, and that is including the price in my books. If you're after a Springer figure for accuracy, accessories, anything bar solidity, then go for the newer figure. It wins on those points. But if you want something for fun factor, or if you already have the Siege toy, I wouldn't recommend the upgrade. But which is better? I don't know. This one's on you folks. Vote with your interactions. Like for Siege, subscribe for 86, or do both and stick it in the comments. I'm not one to judge. I am hungry though, so I'm gonna go grab some soup.